Let me start in the mid-90s or so when in India, where we were approached by a major foreign car manufacturer there interested in improving somehow the structure of the system and reducing the transaction cost in its procurement. In fact, you must know that the automotive sector is very typical in the sense that it is organized in layers. So the OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers, procure from a second layer of big components, which in turn procure from a third layer of rather smaller components and so on, and it drills down all the way to literally the nuts and bolts that together compose a car. And the idea there is that we were then working with the different layers, trying to organize them to improve the quality of their products, to improve the productivity of the sectors, and altogether reducing the transaction cost for the OEMs on top of the chain. And as you can imagine, to the extent that OEMs did not have an exclusive contractual commercial relationship with the lower layers, that this kind of service was fraught with externalities. That is, that whatever we did to help the lower layers benefited virtually any manufacturer, any large buyer, not necessarily only the one that we were working with. So that justified the role of an organization like UNIDO to get into this original public-private partnership. I'm saying original because it's literally and clearly based on the commercial benefits of the private partner and not on CSR or philanthropy or so. That's an alignment of interest between a private player on the one hand and a development agency like UNIDO on the other hand. A few years later, in 2011, we were approached this time by a financier. This was in the context of the African Agriculture Fund, a fund that it was established by a number of development finance institutions there to take equity investment in agribusiness across Africa. And there also we were invited by some of the sponsors, some of those whose capital was on the line, to come in and to make such that their investment into agribusiness companies in Africa improve somehow the livelihoods, improve the welfare of the local communities, and extend that our role was meant to extend altogether the development impact of the initiatives. So again, we start with some sort of public-private partnership with private corporates. Now we're talking of development finance institutions. All this brings us to 2013 when we enunciated our business partnership policy, which I think was quite trailblazing by UN standards, where for the first time we had a clear indication of how we were handling these partnerships between a development agency and private partners. And that is also the time when Africa produced its Agenda 2063 that put industry at the center of development. So that there was an entire continent taking a very long-term vision in which industry is seen as a major vehicle of development. Later that year also was our very own Lima Declaration that puts inclusive and sustainable industrial development as the central mandate for UNIDO. That was also the time when DG Leong came to the helm of the organization, and with that we crystallized, in a sense, on the one hand, increasing interest for and recognition of the role of industry for development, and on the other hand, various multi-stakeholder partnerships that UNIDO had forged over the years. So in 2014, we thought that to make this more explicit and to communicate perhaps more effectively to our member states, that the best perhaps would be to identify two pilot countries, and we labeled these the programs for country partnership, basically trying to put to work this idea of linking together technical resources with its mandate, its capacity, its resources, on the other hand, larger flows of resources from development finance institutions, from the private sector, and so on. The idea being that with the resources at our disposal and the very specific nature of the services, that an organization like UNIDO provides, building capacity, strengthening institutions, and providing advisory services to governments and so on. There was only so much we could do at a time when industrialization is taking center stage for development. And industrialization requires investment in machinery, in equipment, in factories, in infrastructure, utilities, and so on. All things that are necessary to come along with the technical assistance services of UNIDO, but which we were not mandated nor resourced to provide. So we thought that in line with the result-based management that our member states have requested from us, and we should depart from the traditional model of reporting to member states on how much money we had spent, and instead report on what impact we had achieved. That required complete consideration of our business model, one in which, again, what mattered wasn't so much how much we had spent, but more what benefits it had developed, and to the extent that there are other players out there, corporates, development finance institutions, academia, that are much better resourced than we are to do this. We have to define a way to work together to align our respective resources in interest to optimize, to create value in a sense by working together. And we started then very proactive discussions with different DFIs, with the European Investment Bank and the African Development Bank, to mention the two are present on the stage here, but many others as well at the same time. It forced us internally to quite a dramatic overhaul of the way we do business also, our internal control mechanism, our fiduciary standards, our environmental and impact standards also had to be completely revisited so as to be convincing for our partners. And it also requires an exercise that is still underway, that is at the level of reporting, because again it was relatively easy to report on how much money we had spent. We have databases that can give you the figure at the press of a button, but it's much more complex to talk about the impact that it generated on the ground. And that impact also includes, of course, the intangibles as well, like as we were discussing recently with the governments of Ethiopia and Senegal, that much of the value of the work that we've been doing in the last few months in these two countries lies in the greater coordination that has been achieved within the government across different ministries, and between the government and the business community and the foreign community as well. This is clearly intangible, that it's not something in which you can easily assign a figure, a number that we can report to member states, but which are nonetheless very important when it comes to measuring the impact of our activities. Finally, in 2015, Financing for Development conference in Addis, which again put extreme emphasis on the partnerships and multi-stakeholder partnerships to reach the sustainable development goals. And even closer to us now, a couple of months ago, the decision by the global community to adopt the 17 SDGs, of which first time an SDG that is dedicated to industrial activity. So we believe that the time has come for us to revisit again and to sharpen our instruments, make them more effective, provide more value for money for the member states that are invested in this organization. And we see that we have a few distinctive roles to play there. One of them is the fact that we have a global footprint, that we straddle across OECD as well as developing countries. And it gives us a certain outreach to developing countries as well as to OECD countries when it comes, for instance, to mobilizing private companies' interest in investing in some developing countries. We are also not an NGO, so we have the ministers, governments of 170 plus member countries sitting on our board are part of our decision. So it provides a very distinctive relationship on the ground. We are also not a private consultancy, so we are disconnected, de-linked from any commercial interest, and the type of advice that we may provide can be taken as neutral. To summarize, I would come back to what Professor Stiglitz mentioned also about the invisible hand and his statements about a market economy. We feel that we are in a situation where more and more countries have embraced the market economy paradigm. That is true for least developed countries as it is true for middle income countries. But as Professor Stiglitz mentioned, left to itself, the market may not always deliver an outcome that is environmentally sustainable and socially inclusive. So that is the reason why you need to coordinate the process. And we feel that the best, perhaps, role that UNIDO can play in this is precisely to help align somehow, given the neutrality that we can, and the knowledge that we have of industrialization in these different countries, to help align somehow resources, be they from the corporate sector, from the investment finance sector, from academia, from development agencies, to help align for a common goal that is essentially the government's national strategy. So that's the statement that we wanted to make at this point. Thank you.